Previously on Afro K Timeless Stories. A waitress spilled a drink on the most dangerous man in the city, refused his money, and told him the truth to his face. So he hired her. What he did not know was that she came into his house hunting a name buried in her own destroyed past. What she did not know was that the name would lead her straight to him. She found a photograph in his study that stopped her heart. Then she fell for him anyway. And on a balcony above a ballroom full of the most powerful families in the city, with a rival holding an envelope full of her secrets, Amara's Sephew finally spoke her real name out loud. Kang Tae-oh went white. He whispered that name back at her like a man hearing a ghost. And that is where we left them, his hand reaching out, her whole world about to break open. Because the night that destroyed her family and the night that made him a monster were never two stories. They were one story, and he was about to tell her which end of it he had been standing on. His hand closed around her wrist. Not hard, barely holding it all, the way a man holds something he expects to lose. Amara's whole body went rigid, every muscle screaming at her to run, because she had rehearsed this moment for 8 years, and in every single version of it, she was the one holding the knife. She had never once imagined him crying. He turned on Shin Bora without letting go of Amara's wrist. He told her to leave. 2 words, spoken quietly, and Bora felt something in the air change shape around her. She had spent her whole life reading power, and what she read in his face then was not the anger of a man who had been deceived. It was the fury of a man protecting something. She had aimed a weapon at a woman and hit something else entirely, something she did not understand yet. She left, and for the first time in her life, Shin Bora walked away from a room she had not won. Behind them the gala went on. Music, laughter, glasses touching, 100 powerful people who had no idea that on a balcony 40 feet away, 2 lives were being torn open and stitched back together wrong. Kang did not take her back through that room. He took her out a service door, into the cold, into the back of a car, and he told the driver to go anywhere at all as long as it was away from here. Neither of them said a word for 11 minutes. She counted. She actually counted, because her mind had nowhere else to go, and the rain smeared the city into long gold streaks across the glass while the man beside her sat with his head down like something had broken inside his spine. Her wrist still felt warm where he had held it. She hated that she noticed. Then he said her family's name out loud, the real one, and he told her he had been 18 years old. 18 years old and already owned. He told her he had been sent that night, not as a leader, not as a decision maker, but as a boy who had been raised inside a machine and handed an address by a man he was not permitted to question. He had not known what was going to happen in that house. He had been told to stand at a door and let no one through. And he had done it because that was what he had been built to do. And then he heard the screaming start behind him. He told her what he did next, and his voice went to almost nothing. He said he turned around. He said he went through that door, which was the one thing he had been ordered never to do, and that what he found on the other side made a boy into whatever he was now. He said he got 2 people out of that house alive that night. He said he could not get to the others in time. Amara stopped breathing. Because 8 years ago, 2 people had walked out of that house alive. Her younger brother and her. She remembered hands. She had been 19, and she had remembered almost nothing about that night for 8 years. Nothing but smoke and noise and a pair of hands that had closed around her arms in the dark and dragged her out through a door she could not see. She had never known whose hands. She had built an entire life of hatred around the assumption that they belonged to somebody who came later, somebody kind, somebody who had wandered in. They had not. They had belonged to a boy with a fresh cut on his jaw, who had disobeyed the only order that mattered, and who had been paying for it every day since. She reached out and touched the scar on his jaw before she knew she was doing it. He went completely still under her fingers. 8 years he had carried that mark, and every person who had ever asked about it had been told lie, because the truth was that Cho Man-soo had given it to him personally the following morning as a lesson about doors and about obedience. He had kept it. He had never had it corrected. It was the only proof that he had once chosen right. And the woman who had been on the other side of that door was now sitting in his car with her hand on his face. She broke apart in the back of that car. 8 years of hatred has weight. It becomes load-bearing. She had built every decision she had made since she was 19 on top of a foundation of finding the man responsible. And now the foundation had been kicked out from under her, and there was nothing to hold up the rest. She wept for her mother. She wept for the version of herself that had been so certain. She wept because the man she had come to destroy had saved her life and never once mentioned it. He did not touch her. He just stayed and let her fall apart, and that was somehow worse. He took her home, not to the penthouse, to her own small apartment, the one she had left with a single suitcase, and he waited in the car until the light came on in her window. She turned the photographs on her shelf face up for the first time in 8 years. Her mother's face looked back at her, and for once it did not feel like an accusation. It felt like permission. And if your chest is aching right now, if this hit you somewhere real, do one thing for the person telling you this story. Tap that subscribe button, not as a demand, but because it tells this channel that the work behind stories like this one is landing with the people it was made for. Every subscribe is a quiet signal that you want more, and it is the only reason AfroKorean timeless stories can keep building worlds this dark and this beautiful. Now stay with me, because the truth they just uncovered is about to become the most dangerous thing in this city, and someone powerful already knows it is loose. Shin Bora sat in her cold, white apartment and finally read the whole file. She had skimmed it before, hunting only for the part that would humiliate a rival. She had not read the rest. She read it now, page by page, and the blood went out of her face because buried in the middle of a background check on a waitress was a date, an address, and a list of names that Shin Bora recognized from a night everyone in her world had agreed never to discuss. She had not just exposed Amara. She had put Cho Man-soo's oldest secret on a paper and carried it into a room full of witnesses. She called the man who had compiled it for her. The line was dead. She called again, and again. And somewhere between the fourth and fifth attempt, Shin Bora understood with total clarity that the investigator she had hired was not going to answer his phone again. Not that morning, not ever, and that whoever had reached him had done so because of a document that now existed in her handwriting and her name. For the first time in her adult life, Bora was not the most dangerous person in her own story. Cho Man-soo had the file on his desk before noon. He was a patient man. He had spent 40 years building something that outlived every enemy who had ever underestimated the value of patience, and he had buried one night 8 years ago so thoroughly that he had almost stopped thinking about it. Almost. There had always been one loose thread. A boy who went through a door. 2 people who walked out alive. He read the file twice. Then he made 3 calls, and in the space of an afternoon, everything Kang Tae-oh thought he owned began quietly changing hands. Hyun-sik came to him that evening with the papers and a face like a funeral. 3 of Kang's oldest allies had moved their money in a single afternoon. 2 shipments had been reassigned. A man who had answered to Kang for 11 years had stopped answering entirely. It was not a war. Cho Man-soo did not fight wars. It was a slow surgical amputation performed politely, and by the time you felt it, you were already missing the limb. And then Hyun-sik said the thing he had been holding for 8 years. He said, "I was there too that night. I know what you did. I have never told anyone." Kang looked at the man who had stood at his shoulder for 20 years and understood something he had never once suspected. Hyun-sik had not been protecting the organization all this time. He had been protecting him. Every time he had questioned Amara, every time he had pushed to have her removed, it had not been suspicion of a stranger. It had been terror that the one witness who could unbury that night was living in his boss's house, and that if Cho Man-soo ever found out, the old man would burn them all. He had been right. That was the worst part. He had been right the whole time. Cho Man-soo did not go after Kang. He was far too intelligent for that. He went after the softest thing in the picture, the one person in this entire story who had never chosen any of it, who had no security, no name, no protection, and no idea that a file with her best friend's history in it had crossed the desk of the most dangerous old man in the city. Zurioko was walking home from the market on a Tuesday night when she noticed the same car for the third time. By the time Amara called her the next morning, the phone rang out into nothing. She called 6 times. She went to the apartment and found the door unlocked and the lights still on and a kettle that had boiled dry. And on the small kitchen table, placed where it could not possibly be missed, was a single photograph of Amara and Kang on a balcony, taken from across a ballroom, with a time and an address written on the back in a careful old-fashioned hand. If you are still with me, still sitting in this with her, let me know you are here. Drop the one emoji that matches exactly what you are feeling right now, this second. Tell me where in the world you are watching from and what time it is where you are, because something tells me you should have been asleep an hour ago. And if you're watching this on your television, reach over and hit that like button so I know you are out there in the dark with us. Now hold on tight, because Amara is about to do the single most dangerous thing she has ever done. She walked into his penthouse and threw the photograph on the table in front of him. She did not cry. She had done her crying in the back of a car. What she did instead was tell Kang Tae-oh, in a voice like a blade going in slowly, that the old man had taken the only family she had left in this world, and that if Kang would not go and get her back, then Amara would walk into that address alone and unarmed and take her chances. And Kang, who had spent his entire life calculating, did not calculate. He said one word: together. Hyun-sik told them both it was suicide. He laid it out plainly. Cho Man-soo had not written that address to arrange an exchange. He had written it to gather every loose thread into one room and cut them all at once. And the only reason Zuri was still breathing was that a corpse cannot be used as bait. Walking in there was doing exactly what the old man wanted. Then he took his jacket off the chair, checked something in his waistband, and said that he was driving. 20 years of loyalty, and he spent all of it in a single sentence. And then the last person any of them expected walked through the door. Shin Bora came without jewelry, without a driver, without the armor she had worn her entire life. She put a folder down and said, in a voice that shook exactly once, that she had built this and she was going to unbuild it. Inside were the routes, the timings, the names of the men Cho Man-soo had bought that week, and the location of the room inside that building where the old man would actually be. Amara asked her why. Boris said she had wanted to win a man. She had not agreed to help bury a woman. The address was a dead shipping yard on the water, the kind of place chosen by men who have thought carefully about sound. They went in at 2 in the morning through a service entrance Bora's file had marked, and the rain was coming down so hard it was the only thing any of them could hear. Amara's heart was going so fast, she stopped being able to feel individual beats. Kang put his hand flat against her back once, briefly, and did not say anything at all. It was the last quiet moment any of them would get. Zuri was in the middle of the floor under a single work light, and she was alive. She was bruised and bound and utterly furious, and when she saw Amara come out of the dark, she started shaking her head violently, trying to say something through the tape, trying to warn her, because Zuri had been sitting in that chair for 18 hours listening to old men discuss exactly what was going to happen when her friend walked in. That was when every light in the building came on at once. Cho Man-soo was standing there with his hands on a cane, waiting for them like a man who had booked the room. He greeted Kang by the name he had used as a boy. He said he had always known about the door. He said he had let it go for 8 years because a scarred, obedient, useful son was worth more than a dead one, and because he had assumed the girl who walked out that night would never surface. Then he looked at Amara with something almost like regret and said that unfortunately she had surfaced. Kang stepped in front of her. He did it without any drama at all, the way a man moves furniture, And he told Cho Man-soo that the empire was his now, all of it, every route and every account and every name, and that the old man could have the whole thing back tonight, if the two women walked out that door. Cho Man-soo tilted his head and said the one thing that ended the negotiation. He said the empire was never what he came for. He came for the door. Hyun-sik came out of the dark on the left side, and everything happened in about 9 seconds. There was shouting, and there was movement, and there was the flat concussive sound of something going off inside a concrete box, which is a sound that has not stopped being inside your head afterward. Amara felt herself hit the ground with somebody's weight on top of her. She felt Zuri's chair go over. She heard Kang's voice saying her name from somewhere very close and somewhere very far away at the same time. And then it was quiet, and the rain was still coming down on the roof, and someone was bleeding. She had both hands pressed down, and she was pushing as hard as she could, and it was not stopping. Cho Man-soo was on the floor 12 feet away, and no longer a problem for anyone. Bora was on her knees beside Zuri, sawing at the tape with her own car key, her elegant hands shaking so badly she could barely hold it. Somewhere behind her, Hyun-sik was upright and shouting into a phone for an ambulance in a voice she had never heard him use. And under Amara's hands, with the rain hammering the roof above them, Kang Tae-oh was trying very hard to say something. He got her name out. Her real one, the one from that night, the one he had carried for 8 years without ever once being able to say it out loud to anybody. And then he said the thing he had been trying to say on the balcony before Shin Bora walked through that door, the thing he had never said to another human being in his entire life. And he got exactly 4 words of it out before his hand went slack against her cheek. Amara heard sirens. She heard Zuri screaming her name. She heard herself telling him he was not allowed to do this. Nobody tells you that hospitals are quiet at 4 in the morning. She sat in that corridor for 6 hours with Zuri's head on her shoulder and Bora sitting 3 chairs away because she did not feel she had earned the right to sit closer, and Hyun-sik standing at the far end because he had never learned how to sit down while waiting for bad news. Nobody came out. And then, at 6 minutes past 10, a door opened. Amara's head came up. The surgeon walked the length of that corridor toward her, and it took approximately 400 years. And Amara stood up on legs that did not work properly and could not make her mouth form a single question. Zuri took hold of her arm. Bora stood up too. The surgeon looked at her and said there was something she needed to know first before she went in there. Something about what they had found. Something that had nothing to do with the surgery at all, and everything to do with a name on his file that should not have been there. And that is exactly where I have to leave you. If your heart is in your throat right now, you already know this cannot end here. Comment the words part 3 right now, as loud as you can in that box, because the more voices I see, the faster it comes. Do not leave her standing in that corridor. Tell me to keep going.